We'll just try to get stuff down about the family.
This
So if you
is
can.
Jake's Creek, 1918, and this is Jake's. This is
Now, listen,
the
let's,
Jake Smith
let's
family.
begin it. Let's begin it the first time. This was not Jake's Creek.
What was
It was Bill's Creek after great grandfather Smith and after Jake moved up here. They
Are you
named it
feeling it?
Jake's Creek and it made Mother mad. She never did like it because they changed it to Bill's Creek. Now that may be where you're missing a whole lot. It was called Bill's Creek then.
Yeah, I remembered that. I don't see it much any places. I always just call it Line Fork when they say where they live.
And when it was Bill's Creek, did anyone live up here?
Nobody lived up here when it was
Nobody.
Bill's Creek.
It was just a big. I won't talk about that yet. Go ahead. And then 1872, Jake Smith and his family moved to Jake's Creek,
The head
1
of it.
mile farther up the road than we live. Or half a mile. Half a mile farther up the creek than we live. And he had, how many children?
He had El Hannon and Hannah and John when he moved to the head of Jake's Creek.
And he moved from the
And
Jake Hill and Line Fork.
at the mouth of Bill's Creek.
Mouth
Jake's
of
Creek.
Bill's. Because the
Exactly at
people,
the mouth.
it was all his land, but the people taken his land, and he had to move.
So after his dad was killed.
After his dad
After
was
his dad
killed
was hung with the bridle.
on Big Cat.
Yes.
Where was it replaced today?
He was the only son of what's his dad's name?
William Smith.
William
He's
Smith.
the only son of William Smith.
William and Elizabeth Smith.
William and Elizabeth Smith's son. Was high sheriff, and he
Of
was
Prairie County.
on his
then.
way to town to get take his silver off, to have it tested out of his silver mine, and somebody killed him on the way. And
And hung him with his bridle.
his only son lived down the Jake Hill in Lyford, and he had to move, so he came to the head of this creek and made a house, built a house, and made a home there for his family.
And we're on part of that property now.
So how about what do you know about Martha and Jake and the family as far as when they got married and all?
Oh, I can tell you that.
I don't know what date.
His wife, she was born and raised over on
Cumberland River.
Cumberland River,
Clover Park.
and
Clover Lake Creek.
And Liza tells me that she was 15 years old about when he stole her out of a window one night, and they rode a stud horse to Hazard and was married. And being they was married, the family didn't try to take her back, they let them alone.
And
So-
then moved to Jake Hill.
And they moved to Jake Hill and had all these children. They had 9 children altogether in their married life. They had 4 boys and 5 girls.
There was El Hannon, John, Dick, and Jim.
And how did he make his living?
He made his living farming
He was a farmer.
and raising sheep and hogs and cattle
And she made all their clothes. She had a spinning wheel
and a
and a
loom.
loom and a cart. She carded the wool. They raised the sheep.
They carded the wool and they spin it and they made their socks and their shoes and everything.
And he had we showed you the pattern where he made the shoes, the moccasins they wore. And they had lots of milk cows, and they raised everything they ate, I guess.
Saddle horses is
I-
what they rode.
I think all they ever bought was coffee, probably.
Coffee and sugar
Coffee and sugar's all they bought.
and flour.
They buy flour,
They didn't have any flour mill. They had their own mill to grind their cornmeal.
and he loved good biscuits, Grandpa did. He wanted them so fluffy they would crawl all over the table, he said. So my grandma was a real good cook. Now, what else would I say?
Well, how?
And they had this 2-room cabin. It was like 2 little cabins. There was a place where the chimney was made in the middle.
No,
There was a place where she put her loom in there.
there's a chimney on each end
Listen
of the
to that.
house.
A chimney on each end of the house?
A chimney on each end of the house, and there's room in between these long buildings to put their loom and where they wove their blankets and their dresses, and they made the men's breeches out of flax. They broke the flax, and we seen a flax breaker
Yesterday.
and took a picture of it.
And another thing, they cooked in one, these were like two big houses. They were big rooms, they had a lot of beds in them. And they also had their stove, and they cooked in there. I think they had a stove, they didn't cook on the fire, did they?
They had a stove,
And I also had an attic, they had a ladder where the kids went up, they slept in the loft.
an attic.
And that's how they done, they slept in the loft too, they had a two-story house.
And all those beds burned down in that house.
And all that, I guess they had bunk beds or something. Did he build the beds, you think?
They was homemade beds, two of them was.
Homemade beds, they built like bunk beds to the wall.
And they had a trundle bed, and they would put the baby in that trundle bed and push it under the big bed.
And I
They would pull
suppose,
it out and let it sleep under the day, and then they'd go, and when Aunt Zine, when we was taking care of Aunt Zine, she went back in her childhood, and she would beg us to put her in the trundle bed and scoot her under her daddy's bed. She didn't recognize her daddy was gone.
and they also, some of the old people like that would, while they was spinning and working and weaving, and they had a cradle and they'd rock the baby with one foot while they was doing it.
Wonder if
Somebody take care of the
Aunt
kids.
Sal's cradles up that time.
So she'd rock the cradle and take care of the kids. Some of the things that we have film of was made from those days.
And in Aunt Sal's house at Pine Mountain School, yet it had a crack in it where Dave was taking a picture. And if somebody passed, they'd go look through that crack, if it's busy, see who's passing. And I seen this acted out at Pine Mountain School.
And going to the house.
And Joe Creech, that was Uncle Will Creech's son, he was crying at that hole, and Aunt Sal said Joe was in a cry hole and she couldn't see who passed.
There was the crime hole.
They acted that all out at Pine
Now,
Mountain
let's
School
see,
in
what
their
else are
clothes.
we gonna tell them?
So, who lived in Jake's house after he left before it was burned, before it got burned down?
Oh,
Oh,
wait a minute, you have to tell about how he died and stuff. And how old he was when he died and when so
I don't know how old he was.
start back down.
I don't know how old he was.
My grandmother Smith died when she was 69 years old, and she had gone blind. She evidently had cataracts, but
She died in
had-
1912.
they had no doctors or anything, so she went blind when she was 69. And then she had like a boil on one of her breasts, and they thought that was a boil, but it was actually breast cancer. And she died when she was 69 years old.
And when it broke, she died.
And then Grandpa stayed there, and Jim and Zine, they stayed with him a while. And Zine left and went to Washington, to Bader, Washington, where her oldest brother lived. And my uncle couldn't take care of him, so Han and Bryant moved in. The oldest, next to the
Jake's-
oldest girl, and her husband moved in to take care of him.
And her daughters was Lou Rainey and Liza.
But was they still there? Huh?
And Liza was.
Yeah. And they
Rainey
lived there
was
a while.
married.
And then Liza and Rainey married. And shall we tell about the murder?
No.
No murder.
And Liza, when she married, her and Art went on up above the mouth of Archie's Cove. They had their fields named. Archie's Cove and the Old Field was the first one. And where Jake's Creek runs out, the water birch is still there with initials.
At the
cut
head
on
of the
it.
creek.
At the head of Jake's Creek. And they built a house up there, and they lived there for about 4 or 5 years. And they left and went to Carlsbad. And they went to Buckhorn and lived a while, and then they lived in Northern California a while. And then they moved back to the head of Jake's Creek where they divorced, and they sold their old home place to Kentucky River.
And Liza moved to town and went to beauty school and became a beautician. And that's how she made her living. She worked at Cumberland, Kentucky, and she went to Louisville, Kentucky and lived several years.
18 years.
And then she came back to Cumberland, and that's where she retired.
So the only people to live in
And her
Jacob's
sister-
house was Hannah.
Yeah.
And when they left, it was just an empty house. Just an empty house.
Jim never did live up there
No more.
No, he lived with my mother.
after he left home.
No, he was here the first day I ever came.
He lived with us. He lived with Mom and Dad and helped raise all of us kids.
Sure did.
He He worked and bought stuff for us. He was a good person.
and spoiled us.
So what's left of Jacob's house now, of where it was?
Nothing but a
There's
pile of
nothing
rocks.
but the chimney rocks.
And that's all in that field there.
That's all.
Those rocks piled up
And then-
from the chimney.
And then the old well is there, it's covered, but it's still there in
It's,
the yard
it's filled up.
where their well was. And then Liza's well is still up on the hill. And some fruit trees are still there, Liza's on that, used to be up.
There's a
None
rock.
of grandfather's. Grandfather had 250 burned apple trees.
And he had this beautiful orchard. I don't know how many,
250.
was it an
burned.
acre, you think?
There was 2 acres on it.
And it was just going around the side of this hill. And it was so clean and beautiful, and you could go up there and the bloom from the trees would just be blowing everywhere. And then out the gate was the milk gap, and it was a big rock there. And there was a hole in this rock where they fed the cats, and then all the cows would come there to be milked at night.
And
it was beautiful.
grandfather's barn, where they kept the cow and the horse, when I was growing up, it'd been there for about 75 years. And I would go help Aunt hand milk, and I'd get the fodder down out of the loft, and their cows was named Dallas and Birdie. I can recollect them and see them.
And then Zine, she married Floyd Cornett, I guess you call it
Yeah.
now. Cornett, and she married a man that had how many children?
7.
He had 7 children, and she helped him raise part of the children,
2 of them.
2 of the children.
And she had one child before him?
But, yeah, before
She had
That
one
didn't live?
that died, yeah, in 3 days. And then they lived on Qualls Branch, in Lineport. And then after they got old, they built a house on her land up by Grandpa's house, and they moved up there. And they lived there till he lost his mind, and the children had to take him. And she was so sick, we had to take her and take care of her. So that's, and then my mom, she married this handsome young man.
Armo.
He was how old?
He was 23, 24, and mother was 22 when they got married. I think that's what.
And they
I don't
moved
know.
here in this place. It was just a laurel patch. It was all, he had to clear the place and build this house. And, they had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls.
Before, about Zine, what all could describe her house a little bit? And the way the farm and all she had set up. There's
Up
not
there,
much left of it there now
Up
yet.
there?
Uh-huh.
They built a little
2-room house.
2-room house, 1 bedroom and living room was together, and then they had a porch on it and a kitchen where they cooked. And they didn't have any electricity, they used oil lamps. And they
Her
had,
husband wouldn't have electricity.
and they had a field up there too, that they cleared up on the hill. And they had garden spaces, and they got their water from a spring down by the house. And they had a lot of money. In fact, they had a trunk of money, but they never spent no money.
Why didn't he run electricity up there?
Because he was afraid that the juice would drip out the bulbs and kill him,
Burn the house up.
burn out.
I love him.
And he cut all his wood, and he burned firewood. He never burned coal out of it.
Oh, yes, he did.
He did, he burned coal in.
Oh,
But he didn't on Coles Branch, only wood.
Henry put a grate in, and he burnt coal for the last,
I used to
3
love to
years.
go to see them when they lived on Coles Branch. They had this house.
The kitchen
It was a
off
big
the
house, and the kitchen was off to the house. And I'd help her cook, and it was the best smell in that place. She had a dining room and a big kitchen, and she could cook such good things. And I'd help her wash dishes, and I'd go with her to milk the cow. And I remember those days. And I'd stay there for 2 weeks.
And Lettie and Hurston.
And I always get homesick.
Let me tell this. Lettie and Hurston one time, they had a calf, and they got them a plow, and they made them some harnesses and put to that calf, and then run away. Lettie come on top of the field saying, I didn't help, I didn't
And
help.
Harrison was their youngest son. He was
He
about
lives
my
in-
age, and we played together.
He lives in Hazard.
So when did Liza live up further ahead of the creek?
In 19 and 20 and 21, she married in 19 and 19, towards the last of the, I forgot what month she got married
She
in.
lived more than 2 years up there, didn't she?
She did not.
You mean she didn't live there?
2 years is what they lived with.
Well, where was Liza before that?
She lived in there at Grandpa's.
Oh, she stayed with her
She
mom.
married when she's young, she married 1919, but I forgot what time of month she got married. In 1919.
And then what's left of that up there now?
There's nothing but
Nothing.
a chimney rocks now, it burnt down with a force.
It's a
all-
pile too, a chimney rock?
Yeah, I know, well, after she
And the
left,
wells there.
after Lassie lived there, Scott Wright, a preacher from Tennessee, lived up there 3 years.
And then up in the very head of the creek was a house.
That's
Well,
what we're
one
talking
I'm
about.
talking about, where Scott
Oh.
lived.
That's all that's up there was the chimney rocks. The well is a
And
probably
after
closer.
she left there was a man murdered in the house.
Well, you told me about that.
And then after it was all cleaned up, this preacher moved in it from Tennessee.
Mhm.
And he brought his wife and children. He was a homeless preacher, and he was a good friend of ours, and he always helped us hoe corn, and we swapped work and stuff in the summer. And he preached at the schoolhouse on Bearbranch. That's the only church house we had. And they had about 5 kids. And his wife caught tuberculosis while she was here. And then they moved from there over to Scotts Branch, and she died there when she was.
That's right.
And he left here and got married again.